Welcome to Jewish Physicist Speaks. We are going to speak with Jas Hashem today about the documentary hypothesis, about its original form and its current forms, and how, as observant Jews, do we respond to such a hypothesis? Why have people found it compelling? Does it have any validity? And these are questions that we're going to address today, Jas Hashem. So the documentary hypothesis, a little bit of background. Julius Wellhausen in the late 1800s had a theory that he put forth. He suggested that the written Torah was comprised of four distinct genres, four distinct modes of speech, which he said were four distinct authors. And his idea was that if you could go through the Torah and find certain trends in different parts and find patterns and combine them to be able to split the Torah into various authors, so then he had, in his eyes, disproven the Torah, because the Jewish perspective is, of course, that the Torah is from Hashem, and that it went through Moshe, and he figured that if he can disprove Judaism, so then what's the last man standing? It's Christianity. So his explicit purpose was to bring honor to Yashka. This is what he wrote, and it turned out that at the time it caught on amongst Jews. It happened to be a time where it was the Enlightenment, and non-Jewish culture was at its it was at its peak for many years. People were very impressed with what was going on. Jews felt some acceptance, and they didn't have full acceptance, but they felt if they would push a little bit, to assimilate a little more, they really could be true Germans, or they could be true Frenchmen. And what you see is that the Germans at the time, and Europeans in general, had a lot of anti-Semitism. It's nothing new in history. But what you see amongst the Jews around that time, if you would look in a book like Paul Mendes-Flohr, which shows all of the Jewish voices of the time, and you see that they reflect the anti-Semitism of the non-Jews around them, and not only in general, but the particularities and the nuances, and it's very clear when you read it from where they're getting these ideas and these concepts. And so they were very much looking to change to change their culture, to change their belief system, in order to assimilate into the broader culture and to achieve acceptance for the first time, they felt, in Jewish history, and to become part of what they felt was the greatest culture of all time, pre-Nazi German culture. They thought that the Germans were going to be the redeemer of the Jews, in a sense. And so it went that many Jews accepted this hypothesis. One thing that they did was create a field which is still around today. It's called, at the time, I don't recall exactly what it was called, but it's become Jewish studies, biblical scholarship, biblical studies at a university. And the idea was to take all of the different pieces that you have in academia, to take literary analysis, linguistics, to take archaeology, whatever they had at the time, and to try to put everything together and to come up with a natural explanation for Judaism. And they felt that if they could show that Judaism could have a natural origin, so they felt that then they were justified in doing what they did, which was, leaving their Jewish morals behind, leaving their Jewish culture behind, and adopting that of the Germans around them. But they felt, first they had to do what they really wanted to do. They had to show that there's a possibility that things could be natural. And you see there actually a fundamental misunderstanding about Judaism, which is that Judaism accepts that there's always going to be a natural explanation to everything. Even a sea splitting, a sea can naturally split, right? You see in different countries, sometimes there are seas that split. There's a nonlinear wave phenomenon in optics, and you have that same phenomenon in hydrodynamics, and when you're looking at, the flow of water, you can have a sea splitting. It's just for it to happen at that large of a scale and that kind of, at the right time in the right place, the probability is nothing, right? It's negligible, but it's possible. It could be natural, right? And this is sort of the way things always go, is that Hashem always allows for there to be a natural explanation for everything. Because if you don't have that, you don't have the full range of free will. Meaning that Hashem wants us to have the ability to make choices, to use our free will, and to make choices to such a degree that we can end up on any side of the spectrum, to be very good or to be very bad. And so there has to be that, first that there's not a constant awareness of Hashem in this world, that a person isn't constantly experiencing miracles, because if he was constantly experiencing miracles, so then he would never have the opportunity to sin. And we had that in one generation. And it says about them that Hashem, so to say, held the mountain over their heads, right? Because they didn't have a choice. And other than that, there's always been the choice to say that things are natural. At a time where idolatry was very strong, you could have said that it was another God doing everything. At a time like now, you could say it's nature doing everything. And this is the way Hashem designs the world. A person has to be able to deny Hashem, because this is it's the ability of a person to have a free will, and Hashem can't give them the same reward if a person really doesn't have a choice. If a person's an angel, that's not the point of life, to not make choices and just to grow up as an angel and to be an angel. A person is put in a place where he has to work on himself and grow and fix himself and fix those around him through fixing himself and the influence he has, and to improve his community and to build the world. And that's really what we're here for. We don't think of ourselves as passive animals without a free will. This is a fundamental thing in Judaism. So they had kind of, I would say they had a misunderstanding there of what Judaism is really coming to do. And it could also be that maybe they didn't have a misunderstanding of it, and they knew Judaism's always going to have a natural explanation, and so they just wanted to take that natural explanation so they could focus on it and share it with others and to justify what they were doing. So now let's talk about the content of the documentary hypothesis. So what is it coming to do, right? And how do we respond to it? So the first thing we want to do is to look at, does it have any empirical validity? So first what we have to consider is that this documentary hypothesis, it's really a hypothesis. It's it's an experiment, and the idea is that we can apply it to modern documents, things where we know who the author is, how many authors there are, and we run it, we use these different mechanisms and algorithms, and we come away with an idea of this is the author, or these are the authors, or this is how many authors there are. And it seems to have, a fair ability to have predictive power in this regime of the current, where it's currently applied. So the question now is, what if you go back in time first? Suppose you wanted to go back to a time where we don't have anything to test these techniques on, to see whether they're valid. For example, in the past, when people would write things, you go back thousands of years into the past. It's a different syntax. It's a different ideals that they're sharing, different genres, different literary forms, different vocabulary. It's a whole different way of expressing themselves in writing. So it's not immediately clear whether or not these techniques would have any applicability to the far past. And we also have to understand that you can't test it out in such a regime. And I think as a physicist, I'm someone who, I think we all have to be, nervous when there's something that people are saying is, a good hypothesis and it's proven, a philosopher says, I've proven such and such, so we have to be very careful, because to prove something empirically, you need data. In the past, like that, the far past, we don't have any data. We don't know for sure how to attribute any particular ancient document to say this was the author, or these were the authors. There's no accountability. There's no experimental data to determine whether these methods are valid. And this is not a simple thing. Meaning, in physics, if you take a certain experimental method and you apply it to a certain system, and you see that it works by this system, in this regime, and then you try to apply it to a system that represents a different regime without any data. So it's in general, it's not going to work, right? You have to know that you're in the right regime. For example, if you would send light through a material to look at the Faraday effect, to see that the polarization of this light is rotating. That's something that happens when you send light through a material. And so when you look on the other end, you're going to see that the polarization rotated, right? But now suppose instead of your water as the material, or instead of sending something through a crystal. So now you want to send it through a piece of aluminum. Also, this is high power light, by the way. That's when the polarization rotates. So you try to send it through the aluminum, and what happens in aluminum? So the penetration depth is like micron level, and even if you sent like RF through it, radio frequency, so it maybe centimeters, like. The light's not going to get through the aluminum. It's going to be absorbed. On the other side, you're not going to see anything. And so what do you measure? So you might measure a little change in the polarization or a big change in the polarization, but what you're measuring isn't the rotated light. It would be the light that reflected off the crystal, hit a wall, and then landed on your detector, right? It doesn't tell you anything about what you're looking for. And furthermore, it could be that you don't even get light from that, and it's just noise in the sensor. So you think you're seeing the polarization rotating a certain amount, and you record the data, but it's not valid. Similarly, you talk about classical mechanics or Newtonian mechanics. Well, it works great. You could talk about you have a mass and it accelerates and an object falls into the water splashes up and it evaporates. You could put in a little thermodynamics, and you could figure out exactly what's supposed to happen. But apply these mechanisms to something very small like a quantum system, and it's irrelevant. You have conservation of momentum, you have a concept of force equals mass times acceleration, but what's the mass that you're accelerating? You don't know the location of the thing, and it doesn't even have a location, right? In quantum mechanics, if you know the location, if you know the speed of something, you know absolutely nothing about its location, and if you know the location, you can really pinpoint that, you have no idea what speed it's moving. And a particle is a wave, and a wave is a particle. And it just doesn't, Newtonian mechanics doesn't apply in such a regime. And similarly, anytime you have something moving very quickly. So Newtonian mechanics also breaks down. In Newtonian mechanics, you can have one thing traveling at 3/4 the speed of light, and then it shoots a missile forward at 3/4 the speed of light, and now the thing's moving faster than the speed of light, this missile that it sent out, right? Like, that's not reality, right? In reality, we have relativity, and everything's restricted by the speed of light. So if you try to apply Newtonian mechanics and its mechanisms and its techniques to such a different regime, you're not going to get anything that makes sense. You're not going to get anything valid. You'll get results, but if you would try to interpret the results in a classic way, it's not going to reflect anything correct. So now we look at going back in time and trying to apply the documentary hypothesis to something ancient. And just assume, for now that it's suppose it were written by man. Even so, you would not necessarily have these techniques giving you the correct results. There's no empirical evidence that they would. And furthermore, now we have to think about, what if it's not a human document, right? What if it's a document that comes from God? So how much data do we have in that regime to be able to test out, what it's going to yield when we apply these techniques? We have no data really, right? There's no way to know. So I'll give you an idea. I'll give you 4 ideas. Here are some things that might happen if you apply the techniques of the documentary hypothesis to something that's God-given, right? Okay, so here's one. It's that it looks like one author, right? So it's not clear that this should be the case, but it seems to have been their assumption, is that if Hashem gave the Torah through Moshe, so it should look like one author, maybe like Moshe Rabbeinu, right? This is not a simple thing. I think this is just like the assumption people don't think. People don't think about what it's supposed to look like if it's God-given. And so that's one possibility. I'll give you a couple other possibilities. One would be, maybe it'll look like there's 4 modes, 4 authors, right? This is Rabbi Brewer spoke about this, because Hashem's name has 4 letters, Yud, K, Vav, and K, and Hashem in general expresses himself in the world in 4 different ways. You have the Arba Avos Nezikin, the 4 types of damages at the beginning of Bava Kama. You have the 4 types of matter. You have solid, liquid, gas, and plasma. These are things that have been written about for a very long time, this concept. Not only that, but we see further parallels today. You have the 4 letters of Hashem's name, the Yud Kei Vav Kei, corresponding to the 4 fundamental forces in the universe: gravitation, electromagnetism, the strong force which keeps together a proton and a neutron, and then the weak force which keeps a nucleus together. You ever wonder why you have positive charges and neutral charges, and a nucleus doesn't just push away from itself, right? positive charges repel each other. So this is why. And there are these four fundamental forces in the universe. And it's very interesting, the parallel is that in Judaism we say that what's the purpose of our job in the world? The Baal Shem Tov explains a person's job is to be Meyached Shem Hashem, to take the four letters of Hashem's name, the Yud, the K, the Vav, and the K, and to unify them together into to unite the letters of Hashem. And it's a Kabbalistic concept, but he says this is the purpose of a Jew, and we see it throughout. If you open a siddur, you'll see all kinds of things about to be Meyached Shem Hashem. And it's interesting because this is what we see also in the physics. In the physics, the greatest goal of all of physics is to unify the four forces of nature, to create a unified field theory. It's the great ideal of all of physics, in a sense, in all of science. And so this is a beautiful concept of this idea that Hashem was mistakel b'oraisa uvara alma, that Hashem looked into the Torah and created the world. Meaning that everything in the spiritual world has a parallel in the physical world. The physical world is just a projection of these spiritual concepts. So Rabbi Brewer wanted to say that maybe you should have four general modes that appear when you would do such an analysis. And that's similar to the results that one originally saw with something like the Wellhausen hypothesis. Another possibility, a third possibility, is that you'll see all kinds of different time periods. Hashem is infinite, and he spans all periods of time. You might see many voices and many types of time periods and indications of this time period and this time period, and have all kinds of crazy things in there. So that's a third possibility. And a fourth possibility, which is a wonderful possibility, is spurious results, meaning that it's just going to give you like random stuff. And I'll note that spurious results doesn't mean that there's no rhyme or reason or pattern. Often if you run a experiment, but you're just not in a regime where the experiment is valid, if you have a problem in your experiment, if you have a problem in your analytical calculations when you're explaining the experiment, so any step of the way, you actually are going to get certain patterns. You'll get certain trends. They're just not physically relevant, right? So you do get trends, and especially if you have a systematic error in your experiments, that's precisely what you would get, right? And so the fact that what we have today is that all consensus has broken down amongst these different theories. The documentary hypothesis, they've disproven the original Wellhausen formulation, and there's many people with different competing methods and competing techniques, and they say though that there's certain general similarities between them. Right? There's like certain passages where maybe they say this is from this period of time, and there are certain similarities. So this is also what you get when you have spurious results. You have a breakdown of some of the consensus. You have a lot of complete competing claims, but you also get certain patterns, right? And so I would say even without this, in general, if you would just take a whole Torah with all of its words, all of its letters, and you wanted to look for patterns, like these documentary hypothesis folks do, like biblical critics. So like you'll be able to find some patterns. There's enough stuff there, that where there's no pattern, a person can find a pattern, right? So that they're going to find something. And to me, what we see today really indicates spurious results. I think what people thought in the 1800s indicated something like Rabbi Brewer's hypothesis. But so this is what we have empirically, meaning that empirically there's nothing about this hypothesis that forces a person to say one thing or the other. It's just empirically not valid. There's no data in the regime. There's no reason to think that it should apply to the regime. So that's where we are empirically. But the question then is, does it resonate with people? Right? Like you can have a theory which is not empirical, but maybe it resonates with people, right? And I'll tell you, if some people will say that if they really study the documentary hypothesis and spend a lot of time with it and take a whole course on it and work on it in graduate school, so they look into the Torah and they see some of the stuff, right? So you have to understand human nature is that when you see something a lot, So you start to see it everywhere, right? If a person spends a lot of time learning that every time you see the Shem HaYichud, it means this author, and every time you see Elokim, the name Elokim, that means this author. So when you look through the Torah, that's what you're going to see. It's just human nature. And I would say further that it could be that such a hypothesis would resonate. In fact, when they were building the hypothesis, they built it in such a way that it would resonate, right? They designed it. There were tons and tons and tons of possible theories, and they're going to pick the one that resonates the most. So it's designed in such a way to resonate. It's not such a surprise that a place where maybe there's even no patterns, that they introduce certain patterns, and those patterns are there, so you're going to see them, right? It's something that we do expect to be the case. And given 30 years, a person can come up with all kinds of theories, and it's so I think if a person would be worried about this hypothesis resonating with them, I think it's really just it's nothing for a person to be concerned about. I think it does make sense for a person not to spend a lot of time involved with looking at things like the documentary hypothesis, because I think it's not healthy that a person would look at the Holy Torah and to see such things in there. And you do have certain scholars in biblical studies who are Orthodox Jews, and most are not necessarily involved in this higher criticism kind of stuff, but there are some who are involved, and they deal with periods like biblical periods, and so they're constantly exposed to this stuff, and they have different approaches. So instead of just doing what I would do and just reject the whole thing, they see it enough that I think it makes sense for them. What they do is that they say, well, how do we we're going to see these things in the text either way, because this is what we study. So how do we understand it as the Ratzon Hashem? How do we, if there's certain patterns, what do we learn from it? How can it inform our avodas Hashem and our understanding of Torah? And I don't know if they're right or not. I would tend to think that all the patterns we have from the oral Torah that we learn there, those are the things to focus on. The things that the Rebbeim say, that's really the focus. But people want to engage positively with that which is around them, and I think as long as a person is is not violating any of the ikarim of the Rambam, I think there probably would be room for a person to do such a thing. I don't personally recommend such such approaches, but who am I to say that that they're wrong? I don't know. A person, if they really want, can explore such approaches. Anyways, so now we have kind of a final question. Would be. So the documentary hypothesis supporters, they'll look at the written Torah, and they'll say, look, there's all these different patterns that one might expect if something is written by multiple authors. Certain trends in the syntax, certain incongruities or dissonances in the vocabulary, and they'll point to these different things, and so they'll say this is proof of what we're trying to show. It could have been not this way. Right, so I think we have to clarify what the Torah is really coming to do. We understand that there's pshat, there's drush, there's remez, and there's sod. And this is the way that the Torah that we have is. The Torah is deep. It makes a person think and engage with it, and to invest their entire seichel, their entire mind in the Torah to connect with the mind of Hashem Kaviyachol. And this is the way the Torah is. It's however many words it is, it contains infinite concepts. Every way that the Torah can teach us something, it teaches. If it can teach us something in the syntax, it'll indicate something in the syntax. If it can teach us something with the vocabulary, Rashi's going to comment on the vocabulary, and we'll learn a beautiful concept about how to be a good person and to serve Hashem. So this is the way that our Torah is that it indicates dig deeper by having a dissonance, by having an incongruity, and these dissonances tell us where to look and how to look, and they inform us of these deeper and greater concepts. So this is the way the Torah we have now is, And so, of course, if a person comes and looks for every dissonance to mean something else, to mean multiple authors, so they can do that, right? Like, it's not a surprise that they're going to come away with a theory that they're happy with also. But we also have to say, look, the Torah could have been given not like this, maybe. Imagine that the Torah was just pshat, surface level, just whatever's on the surface. This is the understanding of the Torah with no deeper levels. So if you had such a document, suppose you could have such a document, so what would the document or hypothesis folks say? They're going to look at it, they're going to find trends in the language, they'll find certain, words that correspond to things of different time periods, and they'll figure, they'll tell you the author, they'll tell you the time period, they might tell you multiple authors depending on what they see in it, and they'll be very happy with their theory, right? They're also going to come away successful in their eyes. And suppose there's something innovative in the Torah, so they'll say, well, whenever that innovation came about and became well known, so that's when this part was written, right? If there's anything prophetic in nature, they'll say either it was a coincidence, or they'll say after this thing had happened, this is when this person wrote this into the Torah. Whatever you do, you can't really conceive of any way the Torah could be written that they're not going to come away with a theory where they feel that they're successful. And so what is this, where a person goes into battle and knows he's going to be successful, independent of whether or not the Torah is true? Right? It's like you have a COVID test that's going to tell you positive no matter what the actual truth is. Right? Imagine if you have COVID, the test tells you that positive, you have COVID. Great. But if you don't have COVID, the test also tells you positive, you have COVID. Right? So such a COVID test is useless. Right? If it would be such a way, it doesn't. It's not honest. It's not authentic. It doesn't teach you anything or inform you of anything useful. So that's exactly what we have here. And I think a person just has to know that people have clever techniques, clever ways to try to do things, and then they're going to come away with the result that they want. But really, the documentary hypothesis is. Not only is it not empirical, as we've shown, but the fact that it might resonate with people also is not surprising because it was designed in such a way. And finally, no matter what they see, they're going to be happy, right? It's an approach where you know exactly what result you're going to get, and you'll get that result whether or not the Torah is divine or whether or not the Torah is man-made. And so I think, it's a wonder It's a wonder that the documentary hypothesis really has caught on so much in the world. We'll discuss that a little bit in the next little part. It'll just be probably like 10 minutes.